Joe Lemire broke my heart and is here to tell you all about it. Diamond Diehards is on. Joe Rizzo here bringing you baseball along with the dog, Jeff Healy. This is back-to-back shows for us, but when the guest list starts to grow and you get some awesome people like Joe Lemire, then that's what you do. You start doing shows and you do more shows. So we thank Joe for joining us, and you'll get to hear him and the dog momentarily. But first, a few important things. Check us out everywhere. We're at Diamond Diehards everywhere. Twitter, Periscope. I think Facebook's down right now. So if you're used to watching the live stream there, you'll catch it at some point. Instagram, Twitch, LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube. I don't know, you name it. We're at Diamond Diehards everywhere. And we're glad to be that because we're growing and we want to keep growing and we need your help. And we thank you for helping us get to where we've gotten in a year's time. One of the people and one of the places that's helped us get there is fmsgraphics.com. FMS Graphics, a family-owned, family-operated business for about 50 years. They've evolved and can take care of all of your printing and promotional needs. So check them out. That's fmsgraphics.com. fmsgraphics.com for all your printing and promotional needs. Enough with the intros here. It's time to get this thing rolling. And of course, as we like to do so, Dawg, veteran of the day.
All right, and on this one, I'm actually going to pass it over a little feed from the second baseman to shortstop, and feed it over to Joe, who not only coming in with as the guest today, also has his own special veteran of the day. So Joe, take it away.
Yeah, thanks. I'd love to honor my late grandfather, Robert Lemire, the original Red of the family. I'm just following in his footsteps, but he was very much the reason that my family is baseball crazed. He was drafted into World War II. But before that had been a star high school shortstop for Lowell High School in Massachusetts. Had a tryout with the Red Sox and the Boston Braves before going off into service. Came back with a Purple Heart and some shrapnel in his leg that ended his baseball career, but went on to have a great career working for the electric company and raised a family that just loved baseball. My father's first date with my mom was to the grandstand at the 1967 Impossible Dream season. They went to a game then. One of my dad's youngest brother is the reason I got introduced to Strat-O-Matic in the first place, and I know we'll touch on that in a minute. Even in my own baseball career, when things were going a little poorly, and my dad would try to help, but if they were going really poorly, Grandpa got brought in. Just a great man, positive spirit, who saw some remarkable things while serving this country, and he was such a charmer that one of the things we like to joke about is how he came back with malaria and had yellow skin, and yet still went on his first date and wooed my grandmother, courted her, even played hurt, as it were. But was a great man and a huge influence in my life.
Wow, that's a great story, Joe. Thanks a lot for sharing it with us. It's funny, we've actually talked sometimes that with some of the first veteran days that we did. Actually, we're talking about like a lot of the Hall of Famers and stuff, and just like the impact that World War II had on a lot of those guys. I mean, I think Willie Mays was one of the first ones we talked, obviously Ted Williams, so forth along the way. But it's amazing, like just how life changing that could wind up being for those guys. And it's great to see that he managed to persevere through, which I guess that whole generation, right? I mean, he could have been like, look what happened to me, and instead, it went off and built a great family and stuff. So that's a great story. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and actually, one of the All-Star games when he played in high school was at Fenway Park.
Wow!
And he had a couple of base hits there, and I was fortunate, probably 70 years later, to play in one of the beat writer baseball games at Fenway Park. And so, even though I was actually representing the New York team, I got to play out there and get a couple of base hits of myself for myself. On the very same field my grandfather played, and oh, by the way, Ted Williams and those guys played too.
Wow, that's a fantastic story.
A good mention there. Righty or lefty? So were you shooting for the monster or the pesky pole?
Yeah, I'm a righty. I was shooting for the monster, but I had a couple singles, one of which off Rob Bradford and Jason Mastrodonato. But then actually I stole home for the winning run. Evan Drellick, who was a Red Sox beat writer for a time now at The Athletic, he was the catcher, and he still rused that day. That's still a talking point between us.
Well, it's your Yogi Berra, Jackie Robinson moment. I mean,
exactly. Finally got it even.
Yeah, exactly.
You're in the low. Boy, you're really good at breaking people's hearts when it comes to baseball, aren't you? Speaking of which, oh my goodness. So our viewer / listener population has followed / been subject to us talking about the Strat-O-Matic Elite Media Experts League put together by our pal Jerry Milani. And so here we go. We go through this season. Dawg manages the Mets. I take the Cardinals because, in deference to Sweetie Murdy taking the Yankees. There's no way I'm beating him out for the Yankees. So I take the Cardinals, and Joe Lemire takes his hometown Red Sox, right, which are the juggernaut. And he goes 40-20 in the regular season, and he's steamrolling everybody. You had a little bit of trouble with John Miller's Giants there in the semifinals, but you get past them in 7. I get past Sweeney's Yankees in 7, and then we go 7. And I'm just dying to win, right? Like, cause I'm figuring, like, I could talk about this like for another year. As Dawg knows, I'm still talking about stuff that happened like 30 years ago in Strat-O-Matic, right? So at what point did you see the tweet? Were you refreshing? Did you wake up in the morning and see it? Because I'm a refresher. So I was like, as Dawg knows, like I'm a late bird, and I saw that thing and I was like, oh my goodness, he beat me. I can't believe it. And then I saw how.
Yeah. Thanks to my very young children, I'm more of I wasn't up that late. But for first thing in the morning, looked at the phone, saw the tweet mentioning that you were clicking refresh, but I didn't actually see the tweet with the result. So I was able to go and see it on my own without it spoiled. And the David Ortiz 2-run homer to tie it in the 9th, and a Pedroia walk-off homer in the 10th. I really couldn't draw it up any better than that.
Yeah, it was. So I jump out to a 5-0 lead on Derek Lowe, who's trying to pull a Gonzaga. He hasn't lost the entire season. Now I have to beat an undefeated pitcher in really a de facto championship game. And he's dominated me like 4 times already this year. I haven't done anything against them. 5 runs right by the top of the 3rd. We're up 5-0. Can't get a run after that. So I went through before the last game, Joe, and you know what I did? I took out all the relief roles except for Troy Percival, Kiko Calero, and Jason Isringhausen, my three best relievers. I'm like, I don't want anybody else touching the ball in this game. And it goes exactly the way I hope that the late Darryl Kyle, who's been my best pitcher all year, he gets me through. We give him a 5-3 lead. I think he held it on to, because you got a homer from, let's see, Manny. You got a homer from Mike Lowell then in the 5th. That was in the 4th and the 5th. In the 6th, Varitek, who was so good for your team, doubles in a run. And then the computer puts in Percival for Kyle, and he just mows you down for the next couple of innings. We get to the 8th, we get to the 9th. I can't tack on any runs. We finally get Derek Lowe out there, and your computer manager brings in Brandon Lyon. And I'm like, if this was real life, I'm like, you'd be freaking out, right?
No, I would have been fired on the spot. I in hindsight should have reduced some of those pitcher roles, but I didn't, and I knew somehow lived another day.
So now I'm sending up murderer's row against Brandon Lyon, Scott Rowland, Albert Pujols, and JD Drew. JD Drew was, up there with Pujols as one of my best guys this year. Just 3 up, 3 down. Bottom of the 9th, Damon grounds out. Nomar flies out. Now I have Isringhausen in. He came in to finish up the 8th. He gets out of a man-on jam. He finishes out the 8th. He's got a 2-run lead. Damon ground out. Nomar, who hit like 370 during the regular season, flies out. Manny walks, and then Big Poppy hits a 2-run homer to tie the game. I'm like, come on, is this real?
As realistic as it gets. Big Poppy with the clutch home run.
Oh
Exactly.
my goodness, I would have hit him in real life and let Doug Mirabelli was on deck. What are you doing, Doug Mirabelli? And you don't have another catcher. I don't know if it would have pinch hit for the catcher. Maybe you had another catcher. I don't know. But Varitek was already out. Doug Mirabelli's on. By the way, I just noticed that now, and it makes it even worse. I didn't even realize it. Doug Mirabelli's on deck. Forget Big Pop.
If ever one of the few Red Sox players to receive a police escort to a game. If you recall when the Red Sox were having such trouble catching for Tim Wakefield, and they made an emergency trade to get Doug Mirabelli, and then he only arrived just before game time, so he changed in the back of a limo and received Boston police escort to get to Fenway Park in time. And actually, as a result of that, my brother once got me a Doug Mirabelli autograph card for some birthday or another.
He had the big mitt, right? Didn't he use the big, like the first baseman's glove kind of looking thing to catch him?
But I don't think that alone was enough. I think there was a certain acquired skill and muscle memory involved, or just guesswork. I don't know.
Wow, great job on that. So we go. Now we're in the top of the 10th, and Edmonds grounds out. Reggie Sanders, who I geniusly inserted into the lineup because Derek Lowe. I'm like, I think Derek Lowe, based on the numbers, I'm like, I think he's slightly better against lefties. I think I got a little better shot with righties. So Reggie Sanders gets in there, single, second steal of the game. Hall of Famer Larry Walker ground out. Edgar Renteria did nothing. Actually, I had the Edgar Renteria Red Sox card. I looked it up. He did nothing. Grounds out. Bottom of the 10th, Trot Nixon walks, goes to second on a wild pitch. Your ace in the hole, Brian Dawg, who I saw you didn't play much during the regular season, but all of a sudden in the playoffs, that guy started playing. I'm like, okay, he's watching.
Well, yeah, I wish it were that. Actually, two of my friends are the biggest Brian Dawg fans in the world. So he was on the team just because of that connection. But actually, Kevin Youkilis, who was one of my best hitters all year, was injured for the first 6 games of the World Series. So Dawg played a lot in the playoffs as a result of that. But then I guess he pinch hit in this one.
No, I think he was in. I don't know if he was in the lineup already. I don't know. He was there before. Anyway, but we got him to strike out. Lowell grounds out, and then Dustin Pedroia hits the walk-off homer. And I was calculating that based on the cards, and let's just say you got fortunate that you got. It was definitely off of Dustin Pedroia's card because there were no hits on Isringhausen's card. He gave up 5 runs the entire year. He gave up 4 in the last 2 innings against you. No blown saves. Was 17 for 17 before that.
Wow.
So I mean, and Dawg gave me nice kudos this morning. He's like, you know what, Riz, you took the super team right as far as you could take, and I had every pitcher lined up the way I wanted it. I couldn't ask for more from the computer manager, except maybe walk Big Papa or hit him in the head with Doug Mirabelli on deck. Could you please?
Yeah, I was sort of rife with some human errors against John Miller. I mistakenly had Beckett pitch game 3 and Lowe game 4, but Beckett couldn't return on short rest. So then I was forced to use Tim Wakefield in game 7.
Oops.
Something very easily avoidable error, but somehow I got through it. But it was a real treat with John Miller. An earlier version of one of these media leagues, probably 3 or 4 years ago, he and I were in the same division. And of course, pre-COVID, we were, he was still, he was there for it was a Giants-Mets game at Citi Field. And I bumped into him, and I just, a legend like John Miller, I just said, hey, pleasure to meet you. I've always loved your work. And, oh, by the way, I happen to be in this Strat-O-Matic league with you. And I thought it would be this 30-second interaction, but I had no idea how much he really loves Strat-O-Matic and loved that league. Like that 30-second conversation that I anticipated became a 30-minute dialogue where he ended up pulling out his phone and going player by player through his entire roster, telling me about who had done what, why he'd replaced this guy, this, that, the other thing. It was a real treat to have that.
Wow. Yeah, he did a great job with the Giants trotting Barry Bonds out there, just letting him hit a home run every at bat. And that was pretty good.
Pretty good.
Yeah, there should be a setting like, can you just walk Barry Bonds? And set up the computer preferences. Yeah, how about you just don't let Bonds beat me?
I didn't look it up, Dog. You gotta look it up. See if now, Joe. I don't know if you saw, but after it was over, if you go to your stats, it revealed which year's card that you actually were playing with. Which
I had not looked, but you mentioning which card a second ago, I will be going back and looking at it. It did help that the 2000s Red Sox were such a juggernaut that, there were a lot of good cards to choose from. And even of the 5 possible years, I got pretty lucky that some of the guys, their one bad year got left out. So I was dealt a pretty good hand.
Yeah, but you did a great job. You really did. And I appreciate you engaging with with us on the Diamond Diehards Twitter and stuff like that. Cause that's, been some really cool banter. And, if I had to lose, I guess if I had to lose to anyone, it would be, well, first it would have been the Dawg, but second to you.
No, you wouldn't have. That would have irked you for the rest of your natural born days.
I couldn't have lived with losing to the Dawg.
Yeah, Strat-O-Matic is, largely responsible for why I'm even in this job, in this profession. That uncle I mentioned earlier, my Uncle Steven, introduced me. I was probably like 6 or 7 years old and should have been playing on the basic cards, but math was something that came kind of naturally to me. And so I always wanted the extra challenge, and, creating my own seasons, creating my own schedules, keeping my own stats. That definitely led me on the path to where I am now. And actually one of the favorite stories I've written in my nearly 20 years of being a sports writer was on the 50th anniversary of Strat-O-Matic. I had a long sit down with Hal Richmond, talked to a lot of the people in the game that had been affected by Strat-O-Matic, and just a lot of great stories were told, and a true joy to do that. So.
Were you a Dyson Cards guy and then evolved to computer, or were you?
Yeah, I actually, frankly, these media leagues have been my only use of the computer. I was entirely Dyson Cards growing up, and then even have the set now doesn't get used all that much, but yeah, every now and then my brother and I will still bring it out.
Nice. Me and Rizzo were sort of talking that when we were doing sports radio back in school, like in like the late 80s and stuff, and it was Strat that really helped us in terms of like following all the different players. Like you just didn't hear about all the different players all around the league as much, particularly with the access that we had. So like playing Strat and everything else, and like, oh yeah, this guy's got a cannon, destroys lefties, does that. Like we actually sound like we know what we're talking about. Like I've never even seen this guy play before in my life. I'm sitting there, it's like, oh yeah, he's got a -5. He's a rocket. You can't run on him.
Yeah, and it was great because some of the people I tracked down, like Keith Hernandez, said that like when he became a broadcaster, he would look at Strat cards, like especially he says like for interleague games, he wouldn't see the American League players as much. He would look at their Strat cards to know who was a good bunter, who was a good fielder. He also told this great story about how when he got drafted into pro ball, he was trying to recreate some season from the 70s, and he had packed it in his bag, was ready to go, arrives at whatever minor league outpost he ends up at, and his Strat set wasn't there. And he like started panicking, and it turns out then he called home, and turns out his dad had taken it out of his bag and said, no, you need to focus on real baseball now. But like also as far as the scouting reports go, I know Bob Costas said that like, he doesn't profess to have understood the concept of on base percentage in that Moneyball sort of way. But he said just by looking at, the bold ink on cards, he had like a greater sense as to what the idea of, getting on base, whether a walk or hit, he said he had some familiarity with that, many years in advance, all thanks to Strat-O-Matic.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like, data visualization is such a hot topic anymore. And, just in anywhere, like I'm in finance and stuff, but that's a hot thing for us as well. Like Strat was it. Like Strat was there like way before, decades before on stuff like that. And then, that's really it. I mean, it's, if you know the probability tables, sitting right there. I mean, now the computer does it for you for itself. But that really was a, visionary sort of. It's funny at times I sit there, I'm like, if only I could make like Strat cards for like my companies, I could follow them. Like it really is a great little small design. Like if you could have something like that, you would really rock.
Yeah, it's if the people who played it and really embraced it were definitely ahead of the curve in a lot of what we've seen, I think, in incorporated into baseball, which actually is it's a pretty good lead in, I think, Joe, where, with sporttechie.com, which is such a great site, and you really do an amazing job over there. And it is exactly what it sounds like, right? I mean, it's a tech publication that has to do with sports, and so much is going on in terms of that. We could write a litany of questions and get your thoughts on what you think, but really kind of the first thing that I really feel that Dawg and I, see this kind of every day, being this like in this young, 50 something demographic group, is you have a lot of these guys like former ball players and stuff that talk about, let's, not ruin the game so much, and let's not be so data centric here, and, teach guys about like launch angles and, changing their attack angles and stuff like that, level out, hit the ball, it doesn't matter if you hit 109-mile-an-hour ground out, if it's an out, when you could hit, a 41-mile-an-hour, blooper where nobody's standing, right? So we see that debate front and center. You probably have as good a grasp and an understanding of where the data analysis had its genesis, and how it actually started to get integrated, and when it started to get integrated in baseball. But let's try to fast forward to today, and maybe get a little bit of your 30,000 foot overview on technology and the game of baseball.
Yeah, I mean, it is remarkable that obviously Moneyball is the clear milestone and benchmark for the start of sort of the advanced statistical analysis. And even probably about 10 years ago, every team had at least a token effort in that regard. And, it's certainly gone to the point now where everybody is, has their own analytics, departments. Some do it much, much better than others, of course. But I remember, so like those listening, my background, I did cover primarily Major League Baseball before Sport Techie. I was at Sports Illustrated for a number of years, USA Today, covered them, helped them for a season or two, New York Times, etc. And I remember, I think it was a USA Today story in 2015. I remember sort of thinking, there was a conversation I'd had with the player that kind of got me thinking, like, of all this advanced data that we hear about in front offices, how much affects what happens on the field? Like, clearly free agent signings, trades, hugely important, but like when it comes to on field, and I started pulling around players, and it was remarkable how little any of it got to them. And what did was all sort of filtered through a coach who had to become a sabermetrics translator, and they would take advanced data centric concepts and try to turn it into a instead of saying they throw a slider 78% of the time when they've got 2 strikes. It's like, hey, look for a slider when you're behind in the count. Or they would, at most, they were given heat maps, because a lot of guys are more visual learners. But then, fast forward 3-4 years, and half the teams now have someone sort of embedded as a coaching liaison, either an analyst actually in the field, or like before Sam Fold became the Phillies general manager, he was with the team as one of their coaches. So now there's a much more clear conduit. A lot of the younger players grew up with this data and seek it out. So there's a huge change in the game in that regard. But also, I think we're getting to a point where, analyzing the performance stats of what's happened, it's harder. The marginal return is getting smaller and smaller. It's harder to break really new ground. The real holy grail that everyone's looking at now is player health, biomechanics. The best ability is availability, right? And so now, all the Statcast data that we sort of take for granted now. A lot of the leading teams have far more comprehensive programs. Like the Hawkeye system that they use now is great for some of the spin rate, exit velocity. It measures all that. It'll become our robot umpire in a few years. I think that's pretty much a given, and I don't want to give a timeline, but that's very precise there. It does a little bit in terms of biomechanics, but there's some other companies such as Simi-Motion, Kinetrax, that you have like a dozen high-speed cameras ringing the stadium, and they provide precise biomechanics of the hitter and the pitcher. And some of the advanced teams are really finding the smallest little nuances of, oh, your torso, your like hip rotation was off by a few degrees last night. And they know either like maybe that's something they can correct on their own, but it also can be a sign of fatigue. It could be a sign of a small injury that's waiting to happen. And so there's some really profound analysis happening at that level that's really beginning to change the game. And it's no surprise that the Dodgers and Rays, last year's World Series participants, are two of the best at doing so.
But I think you really have to have that organizational buy-in from the players who are going to be willing to, like you said, understand what these explanations actually mean, right? Like, and why. That's a great story. I'll go back to my old teacher at Fordham, John Devaney, who was at one time the editor of Sport Magazine, was not a great teacher, except he resonated with me because teaching me how to write. He goes, "That's a great story, but what does it mean to me?" Right. And that always comes back to me in so many different ways. These players are like, okay, that's great. Like, but what does it mean to me? And when you see that, Joe, the Rays and the Dodgers probably do a pretty good job of explaining what it means to them. Right.
Yeah. And to give a plug for Sport Techie, a couple of weeks ago, I wrote, well, the back of it is when Steve Cohen bought the Mets, there was a story in the New York Post, Mike Puma, who I think was one of your recent guests, he even wrote about how Cohen and like the new ownership thought that the technology was archaic and they were going to revamp the whole thing. Talked to some people around the game who say archaic is a little strong, but the Mets had been a kind of a leader and now they're sort of middle of the pack. And so without getting too much specific about the Mets situation, I use that as an opportunity to discuss, like, here's the tech roadmap that every team should have. These are the things you should consider. And some of the loudest refrains around the game is that for that buy-in is, you got to start them young. And I remember even in 2014 or 2015, the Astros, before they had any real good minor league data, they were doing defensive overshifts in like single A just to get their players accustomed to it. Like, hey, it's a lefty batter. Let's shift over. We don't actually know if this guy pulls the ball that much, but we need to get our shortstop, Carlos Correa, used to being on the second base side of the bag when turning a double play, things like that nature. And it's all about you have a lot more of these teams now have like 3 or 4 different coordinators. You should just have like one hitting coordinator and one pitching coordinator. Now, like, there's like 3 hitting coordinators and pitching coordinators, and it's all about unifying the language and unifying that same culture throughout the organization, so that when from the day you get drafted until you get to the majors, it's the same philosophy, it's the same vocabulary until you get to where you need to go. And that's what a lot of the smart teams have really done. And to your point about like, what does it mean to me, is the best coaches also realize that like what they say and what the player feels and what they're actually doing could be completely different things. One of my favorite clips is a video of Alex Bregman talking about how he focuses on hitting. And he used to have this problem where he would like pull off the ball. So in order to make sure that he didn't do that, he visualizes taking flashlights on his legs, pointing toward the first base dugout because he's a right-handed hitter. And he wants to keep those flashlights on the first base dugout throughout the entirety of his swing. And he, while discussing this, he starts kind of like smirking because he knows it sounds ridiculous and he knows that this doesn't actually happen. Like, of course, his body pivots and rotates, but the fact that that thought is in his head keeps him back just a little bit longer so he doesn't spin off and has better solid contact. And like Albert Pujols talks about keeping like his hands above the barrel of the bat, which again is like, or maybe it's the other way around, but like he has this verbal cue that is like, yeah, keeps the barrel above his hands. And like if you look at his swing, the barrel will never really be above his hands, but like that's how he has to think about it to start the swing, so he doesn't like drop his hands down too much too early. And like the idea of like, I think Derek Jeter and others have always talked about swinging down on the ball, and of course no one actually swings down on the ball, but sometimes that verbal cue, that thought, is what you need, and you need the coach to translate what's sort of becoming accepted as the best biomechanically efficient swing into something that the player can feel. And there's a real art to that. And so like a good coach is still so important to act as that go-between.
That is a great article. It's go to sporttechie.com. It's from March 16th. Joe Lemire wrote it, and it's called The Technology Roadmap That Can Turn the New York Mets into World Series Champions. I literally have it on my screen, and I was reading it over again before this interview. It's so good. And not just if you're a Met fan, it doesn't matter if you're a Met fan. It explains so much about the game today and what these franchises are doing, what they have to do, at least at minimum, to keep up. Because let's face it, Francisco Lindor is the centerpiece of your franchise. He just walked in from a different for different franchise where he's played his whole career. So you have to be able to get him up to speed. He's on first base in the game that we just watched shortly before we started. And, they have the bases loaded or in the bottom of the ninth inning, trying to get the winning run in. And he's screaming stuff to Brandon Nimmo at second base. And I'm telling my wife, the Met fan, I'm like, yeah, he's screaming stuff to Nimmo. Like, he knows this is not Nimmo's first game, right? Like but it's that communication and stuff. I think you have to see it more and more. Another thing that I think is interesting as well, that when Dawg and I came up, this was a huge deal that players with a different international background that included a language barrier. And of course, most of it was like the Dominican Republic, but like we'll be all inclusive, and it's not just Spanish, but that's mostly what it was. Those guys were like left out on an island very often when they came over to start playing, in the low minors, let alone the majors. And one of our friends that we went to college with, Miguel Jimenez, he was less than a journeyman pitcher, but he did make it to the A's. He was actually sent down after, I think it was 93, maybe 94, to mentor Miguel Tejada. So that was like another side of Moneyball that we didn't really see. The fact that the A's started thinking about that, like we gotta translate what this stuff means. Like we need guys to understand the culture just of the United States, and let alone American baseball and all these other things. And now it seems almost like a foregone conclusion for a lot of these guys because there's focus on it. But in a way, Joe, I think that the technology can sort of bridge a little bit of that gap, because it's like math, right? Like you could speak only Russian. This guy could speak Chinese. This woman could speak Swahili. You could speak English, but math, you put a math problem in front of all of us and it's the same, right? And the data sort of can be like that, can it?
It certainly can. I think what baseball needs to do, and I think there are some teams and coaches that are a little farther ahead on this, is and also just the sport generally, even not just outside of the pro levels, is some of baseball, these technologies do have quite a bit of a price tag. And so accessibility can be a real issue. And so some of the biomechanics analysis that you see in Major League stadiums is 5 or 6 figures, huge amounts of money, enterprise, level solutions. Then there, on the other end of the spectrum, there's some companies called Mustard and ProPlay AI, where you can get pretty good, reliable biomechanics data with your smartphone. And, it's just one lens, one viewpoint, and you can get a decent idea of what's going on. It's not going to be 100% accurate, but hey, if you're getting 80 or 90%, most of the time that's going to be enough. And so that democratization of these technologies and the data and the introduction at a younger age needs to continue, and not just with foreign countries, but obviously even in the US, there's still this huge have and have not divide of, expensive travel teams and equipment and so forth, and making sure that, other communities still have access to. And I know that's been a major push of, Commissioner Manfred's tenure, and they have certainly made some progress on that front, but there's a lot more to do.
Show us, for the people that are watching, show us the shirt. I don't think we got the shirt in.
Yeah, it's
And now for the audio only people, it's the Citgo sign with Fenway, and it's the old school like 80s kind of shirt with just a big logo. From where'd you get that thing? Give a plug. You give a plug.
Most of my gimmicky Red Sox apparel came from my brother, including my probably my most prized possession, which is a T-shirt that says "Who died and made you Mark Bellhorn?" Which, quick funny story, 2005 All-Star break. I was at a layover at the Baltimore airport, having gone to a friend's wedding. But it was the Sunday just before the All-Star break, and Kevin Millar and Mark Bellhorn had not made the All-Star game. And so they were going on whatever commercial flights to spend a few days elsewhere, but they walked past me in the airport, and obviously a T-shirt like that, you never travel without, right? So it was in my carry-on bag. And so I grab it out and go chase after and say, Mark. And then he like turns around, never says a word during the entire exchange, but I say, I just wanted to show you my shirt. And then thinking quick, because I just come from a wedding, I did a disposable camera in my pocket. because again, this is 2005. And I hand him my shirt and I ask to take a photo. And again, he just kind of like nods, but doesn't say a word. And now I have a photo of Mark Bellhorn holding up a T-shirt that says, "Who died and made you Mark Bellhorn?" And then,
fantastic.
Yeah. And so then many years later, kind of a long story, but Sean Clancy and Foley's, I feel like you guys probably.
Oh yeah, Sean. Yeah.
So so I actually ended up donating a "Who Died and Made You Mark Bellhorn" T-shirt to Sean Clancy and Foley's after I had worn it to his bar a number of times. And Sean, of course, is as well connected in baseball as anyone. And so at one point he's in there, and I forget the name, but there was a scout in there who just starts like cracking up, like, "Well, what is that?" And so Sean tells him the story, and it turns out the guy was good friends with Mark Bellhorn. So he like texted him a photo of the T-shirt. So it all kind of comes full circle back to Mark. Oh, and again, why he was the utility infielder of choice on my Strat-O-Matic team.
He's got another ring.
Yeah, he does.
Got another ring now. He doesn't know it, but he does. But he's got one. Unless he's watching. I know Mark. I know you. Mac, we know you're watching. Congratulations again.
I found it interesting. You're talking about sort of like the translating from the coaches, like taking all the data analysis and putting it into the players' hands and stuff. And it's interesting. I mean, that's sort of similar to business, right? Where you'll have like a lot of the IT guys be out there, and we do a lot of like quantitative analysis and so forth at my shop and other places in the street. But like, you really need to have that sort of critical link between that and like the front office, or in this case, the players on the field. And it's interesting how, like, you hear more and more about like the different coaches along, and how coaches almost have to be like business analyst roles would be in business today, where you're sort of the one guy who can talk to the IT guys and give something that's a useful product to the front office. How much more do you kind of see that from talking to prospective coaches and coaches just getting into it, that, hey, I was a great player, I kind of know my thing, but now I need to get smart on all the different technology that's out there?
Yeah, and I think that's why you're seeing a lot more what appears to be unorthodox hires around the sport, people who have very different backgrounds or maybe much more minimal playing experience or coaching experience, but they have the right skills. Again, the Astros were, many years ahead on a lot of this. But they even had a job posting a few years ago that in order to be a minor league coach, you had to be able to throw batting prep, throw BP, and also program SQL, like SQL. Like, you had to know the database language. That was part of the job. And that's sort of the extreme example. But you do see a lot more coaches that, the Phillies, like Jason Okert, he's from Driveline Baseball. He's their hitting guru, and he's someone who he told me this funny story that the reason he got into becoming such a good hitting coach was because he was a terrible hitter. Like, he was such a bad hitter, but he was a kinesiology student, and he like really wanted to understand his swing path, and like he never really put it together for himself. But his obsessive study about what went wrong for him led him to understand things, and he used a lot of some technology and video along the way to sort of help guide this instruction. And a lot of insights kind of emerged from that. And so there are certainly a lot more academic backgrounds than in baseball than you used to see. A lot fewer, former players. Sam Fuld is kind of a unicorn, where he was a big leaguer for a number of years. But also, a Stanford graduate who I believe went back for his master's. But he's sort of the exception to what you see now at the hires at the highest levels.
Yeah, these guys are, the times are. I say guys. I mean, that's a bad word to use, because we've started to integrate many more females into the game now at top positions as well. Further proof that you don't have to have played the game at the highest level necessarily to make a really big and important contribution. Kim Eng, Marlins GM, right? She's first and foremost at this point, but
yeah, but there are a number of coaches. Rachel, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but with the Yankees, there's a coach with the Giants. I mean, even occasionally on field positions too, and it's wonderful to see. And it really doesn't matter if you played the game or not, and you can still bring a lot of expertise and insight.
Yeah, it's really good stuff. looking through my notes, I think we covered most of the big stuff without even me having to take a look down. But there was one thing that we, like, you sort of mentioned your brother a little bit. Like, you talk about him like he's just, your brother and not some big important guy who hangs out with presidents. So pump your brother's tires a little bit here. Come on.
He doesn't need any more pumping.
Give him some. Go ahead.
Hey, I'm the younger brother. I'm supposed to make those kinds of shots. But yes, my brother, Jonathan Lemire, writes for the Associated Press, but he's also a regular MSNBC contributor. And so, to not get political, you can make whatever you want out of the Trump presidency, but there was one very clear and obvious beneficiary, and that was my brother's career. He was covering City Hall for the Associated Press in 2015, and when Trump was about to announce his candidacy, they said, "Hey, you're already doing some New York City politics. This probably won't last very long. Why don't you go up to the big announcement and just follow him around for a little while? It'll be over. Then you'll go back to de Blasio and City Hall." And then, of course, many years later, he is where he is now.
Was he on the escalator, the infamous?
He was at the bottom of the escalator watching Trump come down. Yeah, no, he was there for that. And then my brother, probably his highest profile moment was when Trump and Putin had that press conference side by side. And my brother was the one who asked Trump, "Who do you believe, your own intelligence agencies or President Putin?" And Trump essentially said Putin, and obviously
was a great question
after that.
Yeah, and I think you had that same question for Sandy Alderson. Who do you believe about your data analytics team or the guy swinging the bat? So
similar stakes too, obviously.
Well, for the dog, he's all about his Mets here. So.
What's going to impact me much more personally?
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so we can find you at sporttechie.com. I urge everyone, it's Techie, Techie. So sport and then Techie, all one word.
Yeah, my previous job was at a website called Vocative, and no one knew why we were called that. No one could spell it. So it's kind of handy now to have a very intuitive name these days. But yeah, we cover sports technology, kind of the only shop in town that focuses entirely on this giant industry.
And you really do a great job. I really enjoy it, and I don't know how you write so much. You are a machine, I think, is the way.
I am currently our only full-time writer, so it's sort of by default.
That's it. It's not a lot of choice. Machine. Hey, you still got to do it, right? Like you're like a really good softball pitcher. You just pitch every game. Why? Because you're the pitcher. That's it. There's nobody else. So yeah, we enjoy that. We encourage people to check that out, and every now and then, and we're flipping around on MLB Network, and we see you over there, right? So tell us a little bit about that. When are we going to see you on there again? Do you have a regular schedule, or is it just ad hoc?
Primarily ad hoc. In some previous gigs, I probably appeared more regularly. I think it's likely I'll be back on it at some point this month, but appear with periodically on Brian Kenny's MLB Now show, which is always fun, and he's the best. And then sometimes non-technology topics, I do some freelancing for the New York Times as well. And one of the recent stories that one of those stories that it was 7 years in the making, but Daniel Kahneman, the famed psychologist, wrote of the longtime bestseller book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And 7 years ago, I was introduced to this as a book that had gained a lot of popularity in baseball, and sort of making teams really rethink how they consider decisions, and trying to eliminate as much bias as possible especially in their scouting process. And so I wrote recently about how that's kind of become it's a book that barely mentions baseball, and yet it's the kind of the essential read of front offices. And it's probably harder to find a front office executive who has not read that book than has at this point. So
very cool.
What sort of examples does he use to help illustrate that?
I'm sorry?
What sort of examples did the author use to kind of help illustrate the thinking, if not baseball?
Yeah, so the crux, I mean, he doesn't talk about baseball at all, but the crux of it is that everybody has a system one, which is your fast reaction, like, you know, what Gladwell talked about, your blink, you know, reaction, but it's you want to, your brain wants to create order. It wants to have a quick, you know, you can train it with expertise, but it's a quick thinking. Whereas system two is your longer, more rational, reasoned, slow process. That's, you know, so thinking fast and slow. And that's the one that, you know, you sort of want to tap into on like the important decisions, but it can be prone to fatigue. It can be kind of lazy. And so system one ends up sort of coming in place. And as a result, there's you know, a good example from that I used in the story is Everett Tiford, who he played a few years in the big leagues, pitcher for the Royals. When he was in college, the Sig Mejdal, who was then with the Cardinals, then with the Astros, now he's with the Orioles, but one of the top analytic minds in baseball, his statistical modeling suggested that Tiford would be a great draft pick. He had, even though he pitched for Georgia Southern, not a huge program, he'd done very well at the Cape Cod League. So the Cardinals area scout files a report, the cross-checker goes to see him. And before the game starts, he just sees some guys milling about on the mound, fixing it up. None of them wearing uniforms, thinks that's just the grounds crew. A couple innings later, he realizes that, like, wait a second, one of those groundskeepers now has that jersey on that says Tiford. So this guy that I was told, you know, was going to be this great pitcher looked like he's part of the grounds crew. And Tiford, to his credit, realized, he's like, look, at the time he was like 6 foot, $150. I mean, he like did not look like a big league caliber pitcher. But it's sort of what Kahneman in the book would refer to as the representativeness heuristic, whereas you even though baseball is of course the sport with Altuve and Aaron Judge, and yet, you know, like in your mind, you get drawn to the stereotypical or the classic examples, and anything that deviates too far from that kind of gets discounted. And so, not that Tiford ended up being, of course, a big league star, but he was a 12th round pick, and, you know, had a few good years, but he largely was discarded in that draft process because he looked like a groundskeeper.
Well, and of course, right now, I could tell you what's going on in the dog's mind. He's thinking, either can I read this book or can I somehow get my kids to read it? Which, of course, is going to transition us into Xavier Rizzo, Die Hard Dads. Okay, so I think, let's see, between us, we have what, 11 kids? Did I count that right? 6, 3, and 2.
You guys are catching up.
Yeah, we're catching up. So Joe said that he would willingly be part of our wrap-up segment, Die Hard Dads, where we say this is a podcast about baseball and about life, and this is a little bit of the life part. So I'll lead this one off, and it's a sort of baseball, but sort of softball centric thing, and it's a short one, Dog. So get ready, and Joe, get ready. Whoever's going to jump in next. My daughter she's really an ice hockey player, and you know, that's like her first and foremost, but she also plays softball. And, you know, because of hockey commitments and stuff, she couldn't go to the off-season workouts. And, you know, she's, let's just say she's more committed to hockey, and it shows a little bit. So she's got to ramp up to catch up on softball. So we're going over stuff, you know, last week as she's getting ready for, you know, for the start of practices and everything. And I'm looking at her swing, and I have all this stuff in my mind now about like all this data, these launch angles, and I just, you know, and she's doing her swing, and we're just doing basic stuff like, you know, soft toss. And I noticed this hitch in her swing, and I'm saying, okay, I've been around baseball for a long time. I know what a hitch is. I can kind of explain it. How do we get rid of it? Whatever. And, you know, I had to throw out everything that I remembered and that I've learned. And I said, you know what? I think that what you're doing is you're doing, and I'm doing air quotes for the people that are listening. I'm like, you're doing your swing when you're up there. I said, forget about just doing your swing. When you see the ball, just hit it and try to put your bat on it. Boom, hitting lasers, like hit one right back to me. I had to protect myself. And I think she's off and running. I don't know if I'm diving in and putting her in like hitting lessons or anything like that. I think, you know, the season will ramp up. We'll see how she does. And maybe she could get hit by pitches because she's not afraid of the ball like her dad was, you know, and she'll just get hit. She doesn't care because it's not a hockey puck and it's going half as fast. So I think we corrected the swing by just those little words. So Dawg and Joe, that's my diehard dads for this episode.
There you go. Hitting guru Joe Rizzo.
Yeah, who knew?
Just hit the ball.
Just hit the ball. Just you see it.
That sounds like an article in Sport Techie right there. Yeah, all this, or you just hit the ball.
Yeah.
Joe, do you want to go, or I can go? It's up to you. All right. So let's see. I'm gonna give a little sort of cautionary tale to Riz, as he'll experience a couple of years down the road here. So mine span Riz's. I go from 23 down to 12. So get the call 2 nights ago. College daughter just got back down to school, whatever. Had a little run-in with local law enforcement, a little bit too heavy on the pedal or whatnot. And call up, wife gets the call, because of course it's not coming to me. And the tears, everything else like that, it's okay, don't worry about it, it'll be a this to that. And all I could think in my head was like, what would the same conversation sound like if my son was calling me and told me he got a speeding ticket down in a certain state down south? And it'd be probably a little bit more pointed a conversation coming back from me towards my son, and just realizing sort of the differences between a son and a daughter and everything else. And I don't know, that just sort of cracked me up. I haven't had to write the check yet, so they'll take some of the fun off the story. But I just thought the differences to it, like I'm almost apologizing. I'm like, what am I apologizing for? I'm like, you took the car, you're flying along, you're getting nailed right next to college. Come on. But such is life, and that may be in your future. But it's 15, they're knocking on the door there. So
yeah, they're close. 3 at once. Three at once. Driving lessons all at once. I'm brave. I've done it.
There you go.
Allegedly, there's stories that I have. Nobody's old enough for a permit.
So we got a good story. We got a cautionary tale. So Joe, you get to settle this out.
Yeah, I mean, mine are 1 and 4, so we're a long.
This is a good story.
Yeah, we're a long way away from where you are, but they, you know, the funny thing about the tech is, you know, you see all these gadgets and devices, and all I want to do is, like, you know, throw a bat sensor on my son's T-ball set, right? You know, like, you know, the temptation is there. I mean, of course, I'm the dad who, you know, I know that the math is 90% of the human population is right-handed, but 30% of innings are thrown by lefties. And so you have 3 times better of a chance of being a pitcher if you're a lefty. And so I didn't, but considered tying my son's right hand behind his back for a few years to make sure he was a lefty, right? I didn't, as I said.
Every dad thinks that.
Every dad. No, actually, to bring back a major league example of this, Ricky Romero, who was the first-round pick of the Blue Jays and had a good few years, he actually, as of the age of 5 in kindergarten, was very ambidextrous still. And so at one point, he got sent home with a note from his teacher saying, you know, we're trying to teach the kids how to learn to write. He needs to kind of pick one and focus on it. And his dad loved baseball. So his dad said, you're going to be a lefty. And it worked out. Some of it is preordained. But yeah, no, I'm still on the upswing potential on a lot of these things. But I will say that we've been in the city for more than a decade, and my wife and I, and we're about to move to the suburbs. And when we started looking at houses, the only requirement I had was a backyard big enough for wiffle ball. And
there you go.
Boy.
That's my true love. Even beyond Strat, I gotta say, wiffle ball is actually my true love of. There were
many good wiffle ball games in the college years at Healy's place in Westchester. I will say that. Is the Garden State in the plan, or are you going back up?
Where in Westchester were you, Healy?
I was up in Katona. So
no kidding.
Way up there.
That's where I'm moving.
It's a great town. Great town. I was actually in Golden's Bridge. This when I'm up, you have to start to explain where it is. So Katona's
we're closer to the Golden's Bridge train station.
That's pretty much it. You might be at my house. So I'll show you the Brattle Dome eventually. We'll get it up there.
We'll talk off air about this, but yeah, we're getting up there Oh, this summer, presuming everything goes well.
It's a wonderful area and plenty of room and great place for kids to grow up, in my opinion. So
yeah, well, thanks. That's
good
that's
win
what
there.
we're hoping for and why we chose it. So
I once in Healy's in a front yard wiffle ball game, as we were approaching dusk, I once got dusted by a bat flying right at my head. And everybody's wondering, like, the ball was down the middle. Everybody's wondering, Riz, what the hell you doing? Why'd you hit the deck? I'm like, there was a bat who was about to literally hit my head. So that's gold.
Well, that sounds like an almost wiffle ball injury. So I'll see that story and raise you. Back in 2008, I was playing in Central Park with my brother, and he threw this curveball that, sure, it broke a lot. It was a terrible pitch. I kind of flailed at it anyway. I'm not really sure why, but I rolled my foot the wrong way and broke the fifth metatarsal in my foot. Something called a Jones fracture, which prior to Kevin Durant, no one had heard of a Jones fracture before, but they're notoriously poor healing area, a lot of low blood flow. So anyway, the thing is, that was 3 weeks before my brother's wedding. And so the best man, allegedly, was actually up there on crutches. So I was maybe a better man, an okay fella, but I certainly did not live up to the hype when I was giving a toast on crutches. Although I was a better dancer with crutches because apparently I need a prop in order to do anything.
Well, it sounds like you made lemonade.
Yeah, I tried.
That's right.
Or chicken soup. I think I got that right, didn't I? I didn't use the whole, like, I didn't malapropize anything.
You probably should have read the book.
Yeah, probably should. I will say this. I'm gonna. This is not a humble brag. This is one of my favorite stories. Dawg, our buddy Kitch can vouch for this. I hit the longest home run possible by wiffle ball metrics. If they had metrics, this would have happened. We were at Kitch's house. I am right-handed. I can bat left-handed. And I was imitating like Darryl Strawberry's swing because, as Dawg knows, like batting, I was like also batting stance guy because I could do everybody. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna imitate Strawberry's swing because we were playing in his front yard. And if you were batting right-handed, like if you pulled it even like just 2 feet left of second base, it was just going to hit the trees. But if you batted left-handed, there was a clear path. So I'm like, I'm going to mess around and hit left-handed off the lefty Kitch. And he just throws it. And I just took a regular swing and the ball went like over like the next house after it. And we're still mesmerized to this day. It wasn't like a windy day, but Kitch, if he ever wants to come on, will completely back up that story. We're looking at like, how did this even happen? So I think we all got wiffle ball stories. Who doesn't? It's like it's the wiffle ball episode on sporttechie.com. That's what's going to happen. And diamonddiehards.com. Okay, I think that's going to wrap it up. We told you how to find Joe's stuff, and you can find him on Twitter at Lemire Joe. That's Lemire Joe. So it's just his name flip backwards. You can follow the dog at Jeff Healy 8, and I'm doing the Diamond Diehards Twitter, so you can check me out at Diamond Diehards, diamonddiehards.com. We're Diamond Diehards everywhere, anywhere you want to be. And FMSgraphics.com, you got to check them out. They're the place for all your printing and promotional needs. Give them a shot because they gave us a shot. So that's going to do it. Thank you so much, Joe. It was really great. Once again, you exceeded expectations. Honestly, this was more like therapy for me. I had to get all this Strat stuff off my chest, and hopefully Jerry will organize another league. I bow down to you. The Red Sox are my daddy.
Congratulations and hail to the king.
Yeah, it was really great. You did a really great job, and thanks for the interaction and for coming on and joining us. So that's going to do it for this episode. For our guest, Joe Lemire, and the dog, Jeff Healy. This is Joe Rizzo. Diamond Diehards is out.